Hello there. Hi. It's good to see you all. I am doing well. I'm sure you're asking. I'm in the process of being slowly but surely subsumed by my beard, which I'm losing a war with. But in any event, we have one last bloodline to talk about. And I'm not going to waste any time because I've already wasted enough. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So we are here today to, of course, delve into the Blood Dragons. A bloodline that I think tends to be the favorite for a lot of people because there's kind of a beautiful simplicity to them. They are, in my opinion, the simplest of the bloodlines in kind of like a grand scheme side of things. They are the martial bloodline. They don't bother with any of the magic. They don't really bother with any of the summoning. They don't really bother with the large legions. They are perfectionists most of the time. Individuals who were turned because they in life usually demonstrated some sort of notable martial skill or demonstrated a desire to become like the absolute zenith of what a warrior can be, and impressed another blood dragon to the extent that they were given the blood kiss and turned into a undead creature that forever seeks to perfect its skills at warfare and battle. And the whole thing about blood dragons and why they're called blood dragons is they're always chasing the dragon, so to speak. But rather than trying to repeat an experience, what they're looking for is a cure for their vampirism. Because a long time ago, according to various myths and legends, which do end up being true, Aborash, the founder of the Blood Dragons, the first of their line from back in Lamia, at some point, many centuries after the fall of Lamia and the defeat of Nagash and all of that stuff, he, along with his original acolytes following behind him, discovered on a mountaintop a very, very big, terrifying red dragon. In more recent interpretations of that particular story, it is claimed to be an emperor dragon, which are the most terrifying. They are the largest and most ancient of dragons. Most of them have the capacity for magic. Some of them are even full-on wizard lords. Like, they are as skilled in magic as the greatest of the elves, or can like go toe-to-toe with the Slann and such. They're really nightmarish entities. And Aborash took this thing on one-on-one, and not being a character that really has any aptitude for magic, Aborash, it's implied he can use the most basic forms of the lore of vampires. Really, though, I think he only uses it to kind of boost himself up in little ways. He's more about pushing his undead body to the absolute limit. And despite the fact he has virtually no skill at sorcery, he went on to slay this dragon in single combat, which is genuinely insane. It is one of the most impressive martial feats in Warhammer Fantasy. Aborash, as much as it's a bit of a meme, I think, at this point, he truly is one of the most gifted warriors we know of. It's a bit unfortunate that we don't know as much about him as I would like to. Aborash was always planned to get a Black Library novel dedicated to him following as the final installment of the Masters of Death trilogy, but that book got canceled once the End Times was set upon as the goal for Warhammer Fantasy. So we never got a great focus on him. We never got a book detailing maybe his like preferred weapon set, or if he has any notable magic items he likes to keep around. He's a bit of a mystery, honestly. And there's a reason for that. Aborash, once he accomplished this amazing goal of killing this dragon mano a mano, and he glutted himself on its blood and then he cast it off the mountain, he discovered that he had cured his vampirism. Because it's not even good enough to drink dragon blood. It has to be like a very powerful dragon's blood. And he had basically cured the imperfection that existed in the original elixir of immortality, elixir of eternal life that Neferata had created. The dragon's blood, or a creature seemingly of suitable power or equivalent power, it fixes the issue within that elixir. So it cures the vampirism. So it makes it where they no longer need to feast on blood of others, and they become more like Nagash. They are essentially a perfect being in the sense of being a undead corpse that is animated by dark magic and has the original soul bound within it, completely disconnected from the realm of chaos, or the ether as it's often known. So Aborash, with this discovery, turned to his, I believe, 4 disciples and told them to scatter to the winds and discover for themselves how to accomplish a worthy goal, to go forth and train and seek out worthy opponents so that they could eventually rise to his level and go on to kill a similarly powerful creature and cure themselves of vampirism. And in the thousands of years that took place after that, nobody else ever succeeded. Funny enough, the only vampire that ever managed to follow in Aborash's footsteps was the Necrarch Zacharias the Everliving, who you can go check out the Necrarch video for, and he did it by being a parasite, not by actually winning in a fair fight, because, you know, Necrarch. So anyway, that's just to kind of give you an idea of what we're dealing with when we're looking at Blood Dragons. They are a martial order. They are all about fighting, seeking glorious challenge, and they have a system of chivalry. They're a very strong mirror of Bretonnia. There is actually a lot of interweaving in the lore between the foundation of Bretonnia and the Blood Dragons. It's very heavily implied that Aborash met Gilles Le Breton. Like, it's basically flat out confirmed that they had met at least a number of times. And it's said that Gilles Le Breton even managed to defeat Aborash in a fight, which is nuts. And that was so impressive to Aborash that Aborash kind of swore an oath of fealty, or at least an oath of friendship, to Gilles. And the two of them ended up fighting side by side in the end times, which would have been badass to see, but we didn't get to because Games Workshop was like, yeah, get fucked. Anyway, so let's talk about what would Blood Dragons bring to the Vampiric Bloodlines DLC. And the first thing we need to start with is Legendary Lord. So I realize that, especially with all the little preamble I just did, that you may think, oh, Aborash would make an excellent Legendary Lord, right? Aborash, he's the founder of the Blood Dragon line. And, you know, we're already getting Neferata, and you've recommended Ushoran already, and we've got Vlad already, so why not Aborash? And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think it should be Aborash. I really don't. And the reason for that is that Aborash has kind of gone from being the leader of the Blood Dragons, or even a guy who leads armies, to more of a mythical figure. Aborash is much less like an actual character within the Warhammer world, and he has kind of ascended more to this legendary status where it's pretty incomprehensible that you could even ever encounter him, much less see him on a battlefield. He does show up a few times throughout the world's history to involve himself in matters, but he never does so violently. He never shows up and fights anybody. Generally, the only time he shows up is because he sees a warrior that catches his attention and they are on the cusp of death, and he decides to give them the blood kiss because he believes it would be a waste for them to die. So, for instance, he did that to the Red Duke. The Red Duke, who we don't know his actual name, was a very, very, very powerful Bretonnian Duke who I believe he had only completed his... I believe he'd only completed his Knight of the Realm status. I don't think he ever bothered becoming a questing knight because he was too focused on matters at home. The original, he was like the badass Duke of Aquitaine, and he was a really big deal. He was the brother of the King of Bretonnia at the time, and he was a very significant character, but he participated in the Crusades in Araby where he was mortally wounded. And the thing that Aborash had been observing him because he was known as El Sif, the North Wind, I think is what that translates to, if I recall correctly. That might be wrong, because it's off the top of my head. But El Sif was the title the Arabians gave him. It was not the title that he had back home. It was the title his enemies applied to him. And it's because he was unstoppable. He was a nightmarish opponent the Arabians were absolutely terrified of, and even if they launched ambushes on him or sent their greatest warriors against him, even fighting against the absolute worst Sultan Jafar had to offer, like demons and such, he could not be defeated. He was too powerful. Ultimately, though, he was betrayed. The Red Duke was betrayed and was... there was people within his own lines that managed to set up a situation where he was he had a horrible poison um, injected into him by a knife from like a very skilled assassin, and that was going to be ultimately what killed him, kind of an ignoble death. And Aborash saw this and was like, no, that's dumb. This warrior is far too great. Even though the Red Duke wanted to die. Like, he had fought as best he could. He had died in battle. It's fine. Like, yeah, obviously he would have preferred to live, but when he sees Aborash coming for him, even though he's like vaguely paralyzed, in what little way he can communicate, he begs Aborash to let him die. Because he realizes what Aborash is, and Aborash says, yeah, no, and turns him into a vampire against his will, which is actually super fucked up if you think about it for more than a few seconds, and it led to the creation of the Red Duke we have now, who is completely batshit crazy. Most of the blood dragons actually have gone, like, of the big blood dragons, have gone insane, which is kind of unfortunate. But in any event, Aborash, I don't think is suitable for a legendary lord because of how he has this mythical status. He is more of an individual that you are supposed to pursue as a blood dragon. Your goal as a blood dragon is to follow the path of Aborash. It's to look for his footsteps. It's to try and follow his teachings. It's to try and emulate the legends about him so that you can reach that level. You can reach that almost godly status. And I think it's important for Aborash to remain that way, to not be a playable character, at least as the legendary lord. We'll talk a little bit about how Aborash might appear later. So let's move him out of the way. We'll come back to him in a minute. So the only character who I think is really appropriate is Harkon. So, and the reason for that, for those who don't know, Harkon is one of the original pupils, one of the original acolytes of Aborash. And the only two original acolytes that we know of are Harkon and Harkon. Harkon, obviously, is a Vampire Coast character but though granted, there seems to be a little bit of disagreement about where exactly he's from and what exactly his story is. But if you follow enough of the threads and breadcrumbs that have been left, it seems that most sources agree he is a blood dragon and he's one of the original blood dragons. So he's like insanely powerful and scary. And then his mind got all screwed up, and now he's the glorious pirate king we all know and love with a bunch of different split personalities. Wallach is the most sane and present of the remaining blood dragons. Obviously, we have the Red Duke, but he's already in the game, so I wouldn't be comfortable recommending him because I don't like the idea of using content that already exists and then like making it part of paid content. That should be a free update. So we'll talk about the Red Duke on the 5th video when I'm kind of talking about just things that need to be updated. But the Red Duke is completely unstable. The Red Duke is so insane that he doesn't really know where he is a lot of the time, and he doesn't know when he is, to put it more accurately. The Red Duke was quite literally imprisoned within a sarcophagus with no blood to feed on and no source of light or like anything. He was just trapped in a dark coffin that was magically sealed for hundreds of years and was driven just completely fucking nuts by that experience. It was one of the most horrible forms of torture imaginable for any creature, much less a vampire. And so when he finally escaped from that prison, because some idiot Bretonnian and a necromancer kind of involved in the situation broke him out, he's really not aware of when he is. So the Red Duke will often, when he's running around and fighting people and leading armies, he will often act according to information that he thinks is current, but is actually from hundreds of years ago when he first invaded Bretonnia after he emerged as the Red Duke. Because he's actually fought in Bretonnia twice. There's 2 big wars that were fought by the Red Duke. And the second war, the only reason the Red Duke lost is because he kept thinking he was back in the first war. So he kept thinking his brother was still the king of Bretonnia. He kept thinking that various people around him were people that lived hundreds of years ago. Like there was a prophetess he was fighting against, and he thought it was the same prophetess, but it was actually a woman who was, very different. And that knowledge ended up being exploited against him, which led to his defeat in the second war. But so he's also, I don't think, a very great candidate beyond the point that he's also in the game. He's not stable. He's really not all there. And he's very weird for a blood dragon, because when it comes to like using magic, the Red Duke is insanely powerful compared to most of the other blood dragons. So that leaves us with Wallach. So who is Wallach besides just being an acolyte? Well, Wallach Harkon is believed to be the first acolyte, the very, very, very original first student of Aborash, the first guy that ever received the blood kiss from Aborash. He dates all the way back to Lamia. And Wallach was by Aborash's side all the way up until the famous battle with the dragon. And then when the 4 acolytes went their separate ways, Wallach wandered mostly around the old world. And what makes Wallach so important is that the blood dragons we know today are mostly inspired by Wallach Harkon and his laws, his personal code of conduct, versus Aborash. Aborash initiated certain aspects of Blood Knight or Blood Dragon culture, being that he established laws that they're supposed to seek out challengers, they're supposed to fight like the biggest, baddest monsters they can find, they're supposed to just, try and constantly perfect their martial skills until they can reach this, ultimate level. Wallach, though, took it a step further, and he actually established the Blood Knights. So there's a whole story about how there's a keep that was down, that's down on the southern border of the Grey Mountains. So it guards one of the passages between the Empire and Bretonnia, that was watched over by an order of knights. And they were the Order of the Dragon, the Order Draconis, I believe. And it was known as, I believe even back then it was known as Bloodkeep, but it might have been updated being called Bloodkeep later. It's not important. It was this really big, nice castle that protected people, travelers on the road, and they would go out and fight like greenskins or monsters that wandered down from the peaks. And they had an important job. And they were known for being a very chivalrous and virtuous group of knights. They were Imperial knights, to be clear. They weren't Bretonian knights. They were Empire knights. They were on the Empire side of the border, and they were very well loved and respected by all the people. So Wallach heard about these individuals, and they really caught his attention because they were so heavily lauded as being some of the mightiest warriors in the land. So he showed up on one dark, stormy night outside of their gates, banged on the door, and he asked to be allowed in. And the Order Draconis Knights knew pretty much right away that there was something wrong with Wallach, that he was not human, but their pride and their adherence to the laws of knighthood bid that they face this challenger rather than cast him out or, try and use more, shall we say, clever or wise means to deal with him. So they open their doors, he comes in, and he challenges them to a fight. He basically says, I challenge you to a duel, and I will fight each of you one by one. And the knights, being as knightly as knights can be, accept this, and each of them fights him in a one-on-one fight. And despite the fact that they were, at the time, some of the greatest knights in the Empire, and we're talking, these are badass Inner Circle knights, they had their Grand Master with them, a lot of them had magical armor, magical swords, magic shields, they had amulets, they had all sorts of crazy shit, and they were incredibly gifted fighters. Wallach decimates all of them. He destroys each of them in a one-on-one fight. And he kind of makes an evaluation of each knight as he fights them. If they impressed him, then he would, as they essentially lay broken, he would give them the blood kiss and convert them into a vampire. If they did not impress them, then he finished them off and killed them and used their blood to feed the others of the order. And he claimed their keep as Bloodkeep and his new capital, his new fortress. And this was the foundation of the Blood Knights. And there's some kind of conflicting things about this is also the foundation of the name Blood Dragons, but it's not technically true. The Blood Dragon moniker is more inspired by the feats of Aborash, less inspired by the actual name of the Order Draconis. However, the Knights of Bloodkeep are also have the Blood Dragon imagery because it's their original imagery, but twisted slightly. So it's almost kind of like it was meant to be sort of thing. And it's very likely that Wallach was drawn to them and as well because of their imagery being so similar to how he identified his own vampiric bloodline. So in any event, this was the birth of the Blood Knights. So that awesome unit of elite vampire cavalry that you have in Total War Warhammer, that's where they originate from. So they sat there for a long time, and Wallach ruled over them as their Grand Master. He continued to do so until the Siege of Bloodkeep, when enough rumors finally got out about what was going on in Bloodkeep that the Empire in particular decided to lay siege to it, and it was a big epic scale war. And in this war, Wallach's lover, another vampire he was very fond of, she's killed in the siege. And Wallach kind of loses his shit a little bit. From that point onward, Wallach had adopted the virtues of knighthood, though they are twisted a little bit to a vampire's perspective, in that the vampires don't really care about protecting the weak. It's more that they believe in knightly virtues when it suits them, and when it excuses their bloodlust and their desire to kill. They don't really care about any of the knightly virtues that don't allow them to do what they want. They don't give a shit about defending the innocent. They don't give a shit about like stopping evildoers. All they care about is finding the greatest fight, and they use a sort of interpretation of chivalric rules to dictate how they fight. So blood dragons do not use like ranged weapons. They don't use black powder. They almost always fight on some form of horseback or creature back. Whether they're riding a dragon, or a zombie dragon, or a hellsteed, or a nightmare. It's pretty rare to see them on foot. But generally speaking, that's kind of the Blood Dragon Order in a nutshell. Wallach's lover dies. He changes the laws of chivalry even further, going so far as to say that the Blood Dragons should take oaths of... oh my gosh, I can't remember what it's called. But they take oaths of... where you're not supposed to take lovers. I can't remember the word right off the top of my head. I'm sure y'all will all remind me in the comment section. But you're supposed to have... You're supposed to be purely... I mean, Wallach takes it to the absolute extreme of being purely dedicated to martial pursuits. He completely says that, no, they should leave behind every other form of pleasure, every other form of distraction, because to do so distracts them from pursuing the steps of Aborash. And if they're going to be the ultimate vampires, they're going to be they're going to reach this truly godlike level, then they need to leave everything behind. Granted, he more did that out of grief and then just sort of inflicted it on everybody else instead of really, I think, making a decision in their best interest. But Wallach is a pretty cruel individual. He's not nice. He is a terribly cruel monster. But as far as vampires go, he is by far, as far as vampires that are still around, so not including Aborash, he is the greatest fighter, period. Aborash is, Wallach, Wallach Harkon, Jesus, I'm combining all their names. Wallach Harkon is by far the most terrifying active vampire there is when it comes to martial pursuits. Nobody can beat him in a fight. Not even Vlad von Karstein. We do get to see Vlad von Karstein fight Wallach Harkon. And granted, Wallach does lose. Vlad kills him, but it's because Vlad has magic. And Wallach grossly underestimates the usefulness of magic, and that ends up being his downfall. But when it comes to just pure fighting, there is no one that can top him. Even Vlad, who is an incredibly skilled swordsman, gets his breaks absolutely beaten off by Wallach Harkon. Wallach is a monster. He's able to go toe-to-toes with the likes of Orion. He fights Karl Franz, and he beats Karl Franz literally every time they fight. And Karl Franz barely survives those engagements. He's a monster. And the only reason he ever, quote-unquote, loses is basically he's up against such overwhelming numbers with usually massive amounts of artillery and soldiers and wizards and such that he is forced to eventually fall back. Because there was a second siege of Bloodkeep after Wallach returned in recent years. And that one was actually led by Karl Franz. The Wood Elves showed up. And that's when we actually get the first fight between Karl Franz and Wallach. Karl Franz gets bodied. Orion ends up... no, not Orion. Sorry. I am totally off. Deathclaw defends him. Orion wasn't there. There were no Wood Elves there. Ignore me. It was a pretty gnarly siege. Karl Franz nearly died. The Empire eventually succeeds in bringing down the keep again. And Wallach is chased off into the shadows, and we don't really see him until the end times. But in a nutshell, that's Wallach Harkon. I think he would be a super exceptional character. He genuinely represents the ultimate form of knighthood among the Blood Dragons. He is the founder of everything we understand to be a Blood Dragon, and the vast majority of Blood Knights you see are founded directly from him, or are a descendant of his. The Red Duke I don't even think the Red Duke has sired any younger vampires. And Luther Harkon is obviously a completely different situation now. So Wallach is kind of the full identity of almost the entire bloodline at this point. As far as his design goes, I think there's a lot of interesting ways they could do him. Personally, I would kind of love for him to be sort of like Emmerich, perhaps, where he's almost always on horseback. Like maybe he starts on horseback, like you can't even take him on foot. He starts on a nightmare and he's got like a super badass heavily armored one, and then you can upgrade him to a Hellsteed where he gets the flying mount, and then you can upgrade him to a zombie dragon. If you want, you could even have like a Abyssal Terror in there as a third tier if you wanted, but I think just going straight to the zombie dragon would be fine, because we do see Wallach Harkon around on zombie dragon a number of times. So that is Wallach Harkon. He's super duper badass, ends up being one of Nagash's Mortarchs in the end times. I want to say he was the Mortarch of... Ooh, gosh, I can't actually remember his title. Because Neferata was the Mortarch of Blood. It doesn't matter. He was one of the 9 Mortarchs, and he was by far the most dangerous martially. And then he ends up falling to Khorne, which is like vaguely heretical. End times did some weird shit. Anyway, so that's Wallach. I would love if they do make him mount only, then Lance and Shield. I think there's a criminally small amount of characters in the game who wield a lance or a spear, like a cavalry lance type weapon, because a lot of them end up being on foot, and a foot character with a lance looks absolutely stupid. So they end up not giving a lot of characters lances. So I think Wallach would be a really cool situation to do that with. Alternatively, you could just go classic sword and board. I want to say in Wallach's, I believe he's had a profile established in the past in a White Dwarf magazine, and I think in those he tends to go classic sword and board. But I think a lance would just kind of make him stand out a little more and be a little more exciting. He should be by far the most deadly martial fighter. He should have the best stat line, period. But he should be a terrible wizard. He should be an awful wizard. When I say an awful wizard, I don't even think he should get like the full lore of vampires. He should probably get like 4 or 5, like give him like half the lore. He only gets 3 spells. Like he gets Invocation of Nehek, Van Hell's Dance Macabre, and Raise Dead. That's all he gets. I think that would actually allow him to get away with being more powerful stat line wise, and maybe give him some really cool abilities for when he's fighting enemy characters. Obviously, he should be awesome at plowing through units, but he should also be exceptionally good when it comes to dueling. He should be an absolute monster when facing off against enemy characters and just tearing them apart in big ugly fights. Maybe have some really cool buffs that he's able to lend to vampiric units that are nearby, because Wallach Harkon does not give a shit about the basic bitches. He only cares about vampires. If you're not vampire tier or higher, you are dirt to him. So I think it would be very fun for him to have kind of a gimmick that revolves around that he's able to give buffs to vampiric units. So like his Blood Knights or his Vargeist and his Vargulfs and stuff like that. I think that could be kind of fun. So that's him. Moving on to Lords and Heroes. As far as generic Lords and Heroes go, I kind of feel this way as I do about the other Bloodlines, which is why I haven't necessarily addressed this topic in every video, of that I really just want them to fix the Lord. So just take the Blood Dragon Lord and make him more unique. Give him better assets, make him more standout, maybe give them kind of a unique weapon, because I think right now they're sword and board, so maybe like, I don't know, give them like a great weapon. That could be cool. So they have like a big 2-handed weapon, or they have they could also have shields and lances, or maybe they could have like a shield and an axe or something. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like swords kind of fit them better, but like a great sword could be pretty hot. That'd be pretty cool. That'd be different. That would separate us heavily from the von Karstein Lord. But, same thing. Able to ride Nightmare, Hellsteed, Zombie Dragon. You could throw in the Abyssal Terror if you want as kind of a mid-tier. And then when it comes to the heroes for the 4 Bloodlines, I'm kind of torn on it. Like, on one hand, I think it'd be cool for them to each have unique vampiric hero options, but at the same time, it almost kind of feels like overkill. Maybe if they are unique to that specific bloodline, and then you still have the generic one, because the generic one is kind of more of like an all-comers type situation where it's like, oh, they give you the lore of vampires or the lore of death or lore of shadows, and they have like kind of more of a like a generic skill set, and then you could have a specialized one who fits into a certain theme, but we'll talk more about that in the 5th video. So moving on from the generic characters, we get into the new units. So I'm going to be totally honest with you guys. I've talked about this in almost every video. We have reached the bottom of the barrel. We have reached the point where I was down on the bottom using my nails to claw through the little like seams between the boards in order to come up with some units, and it was a struggle, but I did it. Okay. And what's funny is that all of these units are actually from Bretonnia, which I think fits suitably, and they're all vaguely martial in sense. So the first unit, which I think is a dead ringer and is very, very easy, is the Kastellens. So a Kastellan is the elite version of a Blood Knight. They are the cream of the crop of the Blood Knights. And I think Kastellens would make for an excellent new unit. What I would do with Kastellens to make them very, very stand out is I would basically make them flying monstrous cavalry instead of just regular cavalry. So we have our unit of Blood Knights, which are running around on foot on their nightmares, or not on foot, on the ground with nightmares. I think what Kastellan should be is they should be very elite Blood Knights, like full-on Grail Knight tier or like Chaos, Super Chaos Knight tier, but they ride on Hellsteeds. So they ride the flying Pegasus-like undead horse mounts. And maybe theirs are a little more armored than regular Hellsteeds, but that would give us like a really fun flying vampiric cavalry unit. Which would be very different. Like, we have Vargeis, sure, but Vargeis are more of like heavy bruisers. They have very little armor. They're very squishy. I think Kastellens could make for a hell of an awesome high tier unit. Move Blood Knights more down to being a tier 4 unit and move Kastellens to being a tier 5 unit. I think that would work very, very nicely, and also it would synergize really well with Blood Dragons in particular, of having, Wallach Harkon or the Red Duke up on a Zombie Dragon or a Hellsteed, and they've got like this little personal bodyguard of super duper badass fighters following them. Maybe they could have kind of a unique skill where they're able to be like extra deadly on the charge, or maybe they get a bonus. What could be cool is if they got a bonus around monsters. Or maybe characters, but I think monsters would be better because they're so obsessed, right? They're so obsessed with this idea of tracking down the ultimate kill, of finding the ultimate beast that they're able to hunt down and slaughter, and if they kill it, maybe that will be the creature that finally cures them of their vampirism and signals that they've reached the end of that path. So, obviously, I imagine they'd probably be very heavy anti-large armor piercing, but if they could have some kind of ability where like they get buffs when they're fighting monsters, I think that would just be a really sexy, awesome interpretation. But yeah, I think that'd be a super cool unit. But I think Hellsteeds would also be the most appropriate because it would feel like they're mimicking Pegasus Knights, which is something Blood Knights tend to do a lot, is that they kind of mimic other knightly orders, and they're kind of a repulsive parody of them in a sense. So I think that would be super duper cool. The next unit would be the most basic unit, which are called Knockers. And no, I'm not talking about those Knockers. We're already past the Lamian video. Knockers are actually a very unique type of zombie. So they are a form of undead that are, they're kind of like Mournguls in that they're not, very rarely are they actively created by necromancers. They actually tend to be naturally occurring undead, so to speak. And what they are is they are miners who have usually been killed by cave-ins, or they were specifically caused through, they were miners killed in accidents, usually by, the accident itself was caused by carelessness or greed. So there's kind of like this, there's this sinister aspect to their deaths in that it was ultimately preventable, and this lingering hatred for those that allowed them to die, those who got them killed, causes Dar to gather in pools around their corpses, and their corpses eventually reanimate. And so these corpses are described in a really badass way as they are humans that look like they have, which they have, they've been crushed by rubble, but the Dar has kind of infused their muscles and allowed them to get up and start moving again. And they're able to dig their way through the rubble, and then they wander around mine shafts, and they're terrifying for miners because they have a natural inclination to seek out pathways or tunnels between living miners and the surface. And the reason they're called knockers is because they carry their mining equipment with them. They carry these giant two-handed mauls or big two-handed pickaxes. They virtually always carry great weapons, or like large, big weapons. And they find support beams and they start hitting them, which makes a rhythmic knocking sound. And the miners in Bretonnia have learned to their cost to listen very carefully for a repetitious knocking sound, because that potentially means there is a knocker somewhere closer to the surface who's attempting to take out the support beams and cause a collapse, cause a cave-in that will result in all of their deaths and the creation of more knockers. So it is like a self-replicating undead virus, which is genuinely terrifying. But what I very much like about them is, unlike other zombies, these ones are significantly stronger. They're like kind of swollen with musculature, and they're not like Patchwork Men that we talked about in the Strigoi video, which are like big zombies, like monstrous infantry size zombies. They're not. They're infantry size, but they carry great weapons. And they just walk into, if you were to encounter one, they just come towards you and they just swing these big weapons that can just cut through armor like butter. They hit hard. Now, the gimmick with them is that they're still zombies. They have very poor melee attack. They have very poor melee defense. They're pretty slow. They don't move very fast, but there's a decent number of them. They have a lot of health. They're pretty tar pity, but they deal armor piercing damage. So basically what you're looking at is a zombie unit that there are less of them. They have less health than a zombie unit just because zombie units have so much. And they probably have a little bit higher melee attack, probably lower melee defense, and they deal armor piercing damage, which I think would actually make for a very interesting low tier unit, because having easy access to an armor piercing unit that's like relatively cheap and is more meant as chaff, but it can cut through armor, makes for a very unique, interesting threat that the current Vampire Count roster does not have. And I still think they would be fairly different from like Spirit Hosts, which we talked about in the Necrarch video, which are also kind of like a tar pity unit that would deal pure AP damage because they're spirits, but they would be more about being purely a tar pit. So like higher melee defense and relying more on their ethereal to keep them safe. Whereas knockers are not meant to be kept safe. They are meant to terrorize you by beating you to death with picks and such. But I think that would make for a really interesting unit. The last unit is a monstrous unit, and it's kind of a particular favorite of mine because it's disgusting and fascinating in equal measure, and it is called a Dracoleech. So a Dracoleech, kind of like the name implies, is almost like a dragon-sized swamp leech. And what's terrifying about these sons of bitches is that they are undead. They are not actually a living creature. They are serpentine-like leeches that average between 20 to 30 feet long and about 4 feet across. And they are known for being horrible predators within the Bretonnian kingdom of Bordelot. Rip Albrecht. But they hide out in a lot of the swamps and streams, and are mostly seen in the River Grezmere, which runs between Mousillon and Bordelot. And they wait for people to show up on like rowboats and stuff, and then they burst up trying to capsize the boat and devour the people on board. And they these will actually have a picture, so you'll see a picture up here where you can kind of see what they look like, but they're pretty horrifying. As far as what they would bring to the game, they would be, a nice big ugly serpentine looking creature, which we have very nice animations for serpentine like creatures thanks to the Quaddle and the Cathayan dragons. But they are very, very strong. They hit like absolute trucks, and they are known for eating men alive. They can swallow like a child or a halfling instantly, and they're pretty damn efficient at eating men quite quickly. So they should cause terror. They have scaly skin, so decent, not super high armor, but reasonably high armor. But they should probably have pretty good missile resistance, represented by like kind of their rubbery flesh and their scales. And then the big thing about them is that on top of being undead, they should have a significant anti-infantry bonus, because their whole thing is that they're excellent at devouring men rather reliably. So you have these big, horrible creatures that slither on the ground, can slam into infantry units, high armor piercing, very high anti-infantry, as they're able to just like gobble up great swords or Saurus warriors or dwarf longbeards, whatever you want to call it. And they're super gross, nightmarish, not super high armor, but make up for it more in the missile resistance department, and should probably have like pretty reasonable speed. In the original the RPGs where I actually sourced these particular creatures from, as well as the knockers, they actually don't move very well on land. They require moving in water to be really efficient, but I would just give them the aquatic buff. So if they happen to be fighting in water, they get some nice stats. But like I think slithering along the ground like almost a giant horrible snake would be totally fine for them. But yes, those are the 3 units that I recommend for the Blood Dragons. Once again, I do want to reiterate that coming up with the 12 units between the 4 Bloodlines, don't necessarily think all of them are equal, but I really wanted to try and come up with 3 just for each video, even if they don't necessarily fit 100% with that bloodline. In tomorrow's video, I will kind of rank them, and as far as like what I think would be the best to what I think would be the worst, or like the most useful to implement versus the least useful to implement. That would be the best way to put it. So moving on to the next topic, we have mechanics. As far as the mechanics go for the Blood Dragons, the big thing that I think would be really cool as a unique system for them, so we kind of talked about with the Lamians and Neferata, it would be really cool if they had the ability to convert human characters into vampires. Originally, I only talked about it as far as like Neferata herself being able to do it, but it could kind of be cool as a faction mechanic as well, where they're kind of like how Be'lakor is able to turn human characters into demon princes. You know, Lamians maybe could turn human characters into vampires, which would be pretty fun. For the Blood Dragons, though, I would love for them to have the ability to convert elite enemy units into Blood Dragon units, or higher tier vampiric units. So almost kind of how we have the raise dead mechanic for the undead, which is like, oh, if you have this amount of corpses, then you're able to resurrect X, Y, or Z. What could be cool for the Blood Dragons if they have a unique system where basically if a unit is a high enough caliber of warrior, so like Empire Greatswords, Empire Knights, Reiksguard, Demigryphs, stuff like that, if they kill them and then in the post-battle menu you have like a separate, it's not like the same as a raised dead pool, but is more like a unique vampiric pool where you can convert them into vampires, and by doing so you're able to immediately give yourself a unit of Blood Knights or a unit of Kastellens or a unit of Vargeis or a Vargolf. So they're able to get access to the vampiric aspect of the raised dead pool significantly faster by killing specific kinds of targets. It would probably need to be limited to human targets. I mean, I guess you wouldn't have to. It could just be anything, and you could just be like, screw the lore, we'll just make it fun. But that's kind of something I find interesting. Alternatively, it could be that if you kill certain kinds of targets, so maybe if you kill monsters, you kill characters, or you kill high enough tiers of infantry, you get like little tokens or little achievable type, some kind of resource that represents your Blood Dragons, you know, killing these more elite targets and feeding on their blood, and therefore they grow more powerful. So maybe you're able to gain like permanent stat buffs for your characters and your Blood Dragon units by them feasting on these more capable opponents. I actually like the idea of that one a lot more now that I've said it out loud. So like a cool idea could be if you go into a battle and your Blood Dragon unit, I don't know how well their system of Total War would allow for this, but it's like, oh, your army, while you were fighting in the fight, your army managed to kill, I don't know, a giant. So because you managed to kill a giant, you get X amount of this resource, and you can spend this resource to unlock permanent buffs on your Blood Dragons. So you could like pick a character and give them one of a series of amount of stat buffs or skill buffs where they like unlock new passive skills or new active skills. Same thing for maybe your hero if they give us new heroes for every bloodline. And then but you could also pick your regular units. So you could pick your unit of Blood Knights and be like, oh, I'm going to give them a permanent +5 melee attack for as long as this unit is alive. Or I'm going to give them, they're going to unlock some kind of unique passive ability because I'm spending X amount of these tokens. And so maybe they get like a 10% ward save when they're within range of an enemy character. Or they get an anti-large bonus, or in addition to what they already have. Or they get flaming attacks. Or they get the dampening effect, so when they strike someone, they remove magic resistance. Or they get immunity to contact effects. Like you could have all these different ways to represent your vampires evolving as they're unlocking these various buffs. So kind of like for your characters, I almost want to make it a parody of the Bretonian system, but I almost kind of prefer making it more of a parody of the Chaos Knight system, or the Chaos Lord system, where you get like you accomplish certain goals and then you unlock a buff. But let me know what y'all think about that. And then the final thing is what the campaign would be about. And for the Blood Dragons, it's actually just like all the other Bloodlines. I actually think story-wise, they're very simple. For the Blood Dragons, it should be about following the path of Aborash. So your whole campaign should revolve around you need to defeat certain kinds of enemies. You need to get you need to kill this many enemies, or you need to kill this many monsters, or this many characters, or you need to defeat these kinds of characters. And you should get like quests that are like, oh, defeat this many enemies, or go to this area and defeat one of these kinds of characters, like maybe one of this list of lord types or legendary lords, or like, so you're sent around and your goal is just fight. And as you fight, you progressively unlock quest battles that allow you to go fight really legendary opponents. So like, kind of like Norska's Monster Hunt system or Emmerich's Dragon system. I actually think it should be very similar to Norska's Monster Hunt, where you're trying to pursue these legendary warriors or these terrifying legendary monsters, and so you're having to go do all this stuff to track down where these big epic beasties are, and then you go fight these big epic monsters, and if you successfully kill them, you get like a permanent upgrade to Wallach as he's like approaching Aborash's level, as well as maybe get like a cool item, a cool unique item, and some other like various benefits. I think that would be a ton of fun. And, you know, at the end of the campaign, what I would do to really make it like super duper fun is that maybe your final battle is against Aborash himself, or is just against a really big badass monster. And then when you finally reach that zenith with Wallach, and Wallach cures his vampirism and he reaches Aborash's level, Aborash returns. Aborash finally reveals himself. And for completing the Blood Dragon storyline, you get Aborash as either a new legendary lord, or you get him as a legendary hero, and you can just, you know, run around with him for the rest of your campaign as just a really sick, badass reward. I think that would be a ton of fun, of like, you're constantly following him. You know, he's left little breadcrumbs about certain creatures, and you hear like little myths of he passed through an area and there's some like legendary warrior there you need to fight, or an enemy vampire, like an enemy blood dragon who's as strong as you are, so you need to take them down and prove you're the best, and stuff like that, all while at the same time controlling your order of blood dragons. So Wallach should have like some kind of, I would love to see him have some kind of unique Order Draconis system where you open up a menu and it's like all the different kinds of vampiric units or blood dragon units or just vampire or just units available to your entire roster, and you're able to like assign certain like chivalric edicts that have various effects on them, as well as assigning those points I was kind of talking about to upgrade the units in various ways. I think that would be a lot of fun. But that is going to be it. That describes, I think, the Blood Dragons quite well. I would really, really love to see this DLC. So we have arrived at the end of kind of the main 4 parts. So for the part 5 video, I'm going to give this video like 2 or 3 days to kind of marinate and for everyone to like comment and stuff. And what I'm going to do is, go back to the other 4 video, or all 4 of these videos, and I'm going to look at like the top comments. So the comments that have like the most likes and everything. And really try to get feedback from y'all or questions from y'all as far as, oh, what if we did this? Or this is what I think of this mechanic, and kind of give my thoughts on your responses, just to kind of have some of that community back and forth, as well as the main part of the video is going to be me talking about stuff that doesn't directly correlate to all the bloodlines. So for instance, I'm going to talk about what we should do with the generic vampire lord and the generic vampire hero. I'm also going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the whole legendary hero thing, because I've really come to the point where I don't think every bloodline should get a legendary hero, or even really be considered, because some of the bloodlines just don't really have a character within that category. I think the only 2 really big characters left who I would really like to see in the game that I think would make for awesome legendary hero material are Conrad von Karstein and, oh my gosh, Dieter Hellschnitt. And that's it. Like there are cool vampires outside of that, but they're not, I don't think any of them are important enough to show up. But that's just my thoughts. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will be back with that 5th video in a little while, as well as just more stuff happening. So hope you all have a lovely day. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you around. Have a good one. Bye.